It is not possible to engage students into a new and significant context if we don't evaluate and assess consciously. For this reason, it's truly important to know well, but also analyze these aspects for having an objective point of view of the student process. Thus, the evaluation and assessment process will be significant. The student's process depends on and extends their education in a variety of valuable ways. When teachers place them into a meaningful and challenging situations using different activities like role plays, video representations, class projects, TICs, among others, providing a well-focused structure for reflecting on the experience, self-evaluation. It is possible to say that learners are being impacted for those practices. As a result, they will have deep and well-organized structures to continue in the acquisition of new ways to face this demanding society. In this sense, evaluation and assessment represents the most of our teaching practices because allow us to reflect on it, also reconsider them, and if it is necessary, to change those practices for more practiced ones. The idea always as teachers is do not fail students, but give them the enough tools and correct feedback to continue growing in their learning process. On the other hand, we have what evaluation and assessment represents for students, to allow them to check how is their process going, to check strengths and weaknesses, in order to improve what is necessary through significant and different activities.
Let's imagine you are attending a language institution because you want to travel abroad, or maybe obtaining a better job that requires a specific level of language proficiency. So, you start the process, but at the end of the course, the teacher applies a test which contains other topics completely different from the ones learned in class, with no connection with the use in real life, and full of inconsistencies in its instructions. Imagine too that the allotted time does not correspond to the amount of work required to fulfill the test. How will you feel? It might be frustrating and annoying, of course. Probably you have lived this experience before and feel identified with this kind of experience. Having clarity on these concepts and their application will enhance the accuracy of making decisions in relation to the particular standard for the context. Thus, if the teacher does not know the context where he and his students are, specification of the test contents, which means what is assessed, and the stating criteria to determine what attainment of the objectives, which is how performance is interpreted, the assessment process will not accomplish the initial objectives and, evidently, the outcomes will not live up to the students' expectations. This assessment should not be primarily concerned with any particular performance, but should rather seek to judge the generalizable competences evidenced by the performance. Of course, there can be sound educational reasons for focusing on success and completing a given activity, and not merely using it to grade the student. If this assessment process is wrongly understood as the only way to promote the student to a higher level, the sense of the educational process is lost. It must be understood as an ongoing process during the training development, as well as the final outcome at the end to accomplish the competences and the abilities specified in the original program's design.
As many of us know, the Common European Framework provides a basis for the construction of language syllabuses, curriculum guidelines, examinations, textbooks, among others, across Europe. The influence of the Common European Framework has been widespread and deep, impacting on curricula, teaching materials, and overall on assessment systems for the development of scales of language proficiency. Its impact can be seen in all countries of America, of course, our country. As elsewhere around the world, English language teaching, learning, and assessment are undergoing a change towards the establishment of a common framework of English language ability scales. This change is in answer to the pressing needs of constructing a transparent and coherent framework, taking the Common European Framework as a reference point, since a wide range of language curricula and assessment currently exist at different stages and levels of education. In Colombia, this agreement is far from being a reality, since the governmental view of the Common European Framework's implementation is mediated through the adoption scope, as it is stated in the Decree 38/7 of 2006. Some political debates and concerns arose as a result of this inclusion. This is due to a framework designed for the developed countries in a foreign context. According to those remarks, the Common European Framework was essentially created within an academic nature. And because of this, some pedagogical aspects of its implementation and use can be ignored for the Colombian real context. That is to say that adoption was not so necessary as adaptation was. In my opinion, the Common European Framework has been proven to be useful, and in general, its use has been successful in consolidating, clarifying, and promoting a discussion about curriculum development in Colombia. However, this implementation requires the empirical experiences of Colombian schools and simultaneously their own academic reflections of the subject. Adaptation would allow schools to define clear criteria for the formulation of an English language teaching curriculum.
Now, going deeper to the assessment itself, the way we design them, it is essential to construct the test and the rubric together, because the rubric should be coherent with what the teacher is assessing. When we design a test or task, it is important that the construct responds to the student's level, what they have studied, their process, contents, needs, interests, etc. And the criteria and the descriptor used, that is the rubric, should be developed taking into account the test, because it ought to respond to what students have learned and have studied. A problematic that I have evidenced in my workplace and talking with some colleagues and friends is that we don't usually design rubrics for each test, and when a rubric is needed, we just look for one on the internet or we ask for one to a partner, so it is totally discontextualized. So first, it doesn't respond to the topics studied. Secondly, it doesn't take into consideration a student's level, because those rubrics are really general, so they don't focus on the aspect that the teacher needs to assess. Thus, it is essential that the test or the task and the rubric are designed together, because it's the only way the test accomplish the construct qualities proposed by Bachman and Palmer. Because if we want that the text is authentic, we need to contextualize not only the text but also the rubric. Now, considering the law of the distal diminishment, we consider that the more distal is the test to a student's reality, the worse it is, because it violates one of the principles, which is authenticity, because it doesn't take into account what we mentioned at the beginning, which is the student content, and it is one of the fundamentals in the assessment process.